Hi everyone, I'm John de Lima. Welcome to our class. This is Politics and Governance in Southeast Asia. Let me share my presentation. Okay. This is going to be a short lecture on, again, politics and governance in Southeast Asia, and particularly Cambodia, Thailand, and Indonesia. For this lecture, we are going to discuss Southeast Asian politics within a particular framework that should help us have a deep and analytical understanding of the region. Remember, our goal in this major subject is not simply to describe the basic political structures and components of the different countries in Southeast Asia. Of course, it is necessary and a given that you know the basic facts about these countries and their governments so that our analyses are based on concrete historical facts, events, and issues that, for example, today countries like the Philippines and Indonesia are presidential systems, while others like Malaysia, Thailand, and Singapore are parliamentary systems. But as political science scholars, again, we have to contribute to ongoing discussions by making sense of political topics and issues using appropriate theory and from an analytical perspective. So here again, we focus on contemporary politics in these three countries, Cambodia, Thailand, and Indonesia. Again, as in your other political science classes, it is important to be familiar with maps like this because they are more than just a guide on where to locate countries and geography, basically. So these maps also signify geopolitical arrangements and relations among countries and therefore help us obtain a better understanding of both domestic and international politics. So I'd like you guys to be familiar again with the map of Southeast Asia because this is important in our understanding of Southeast Asian politics, basically. Okay. Um, if we are going to analyze the Southeast Asian region, we need to take into consideration the historical background of the region and the countries belonging to it. And then, number two, the centrality of state or nation building in the different Southeast Asian countries. These all together lead us to an outlook on institutional arrangements in Southeast Asia. Basically, we are interested in the question, what does Southeast Asian politics teach us about regional politics involving things like security, identity, nationalism, and importantly, democracy? So what can we learn about these things from Southeast Asia? So political science scholars have provided different explanations on democracies and other types of regime and tried to apply these to Southeast Asia. So let's look at first Francis Fukuyama's famous argument that liberal democracy is the final form um, of government, basically, or of it's the end of history. That's his argument. Liberal democracy, as in the dominance of free market capitalism, for example, and then the establishment of liberal governmental institutions, just like what we see in Western countries and European countries. So the question here is this something that we see in Southeast Asia? Is it reflective of the Southeast Asian experience? That's a big question, especially if we're going to look at the kind of government that we have, for example, in Singapore. As we all know, Singapore is very much authoritarian, given the dominance of just one political party for the longest time, the People's Action Party, led by um, uh, their prime minister. And then we have in the Philippines, for example, something that's also close to um, an authoritarian regime, considering the different administrations that we've had, and so on and so forth. Aside from this, there's also an analysis on whether democracies in Southeast Asia are either minimalist, proceduralist, or maximalist, substantive. So by minimalist democracy or proceduralist democracy, it basically means there's there are elections held in these countries at the very least. But if we're going to go beyond that, um, as in how maximalist democracies or substantive democracies um, operate, uh, is democracy also able to translate to uh, social equality, for example? Aside from this perspective, there's also an analysis on how different countries perform according to the democracy index, which looks into the following criteria: election, government, participation, culture, and liberty. So this is something that's done by the Economist Intelligence Unit Democracy. According to them, there's no full democracy if we're going to follow this index in any Southeast Asian country. And then there are also scholars who look into regime types. What kind of democracy do we have in Southeast Asia? So there's not just one kind of democracy. Maybe there are autocracies, there are liberalized autocracies, and there are perhaps political democracies. All right. So while these could be useful, there is still a need to further look into the specific political relations and dynamics in the countries being discussed. So Cambodia, Thailand, and Indonesia. And maybe later on, as we go along, we'll also discuss these in the context of the other countries. Okay, if we're going to analyze contemporary Southeast Asia, um, we have to pay attention to the dynamics between structure and agency, which we could further operationalize as state-society relations. Okay, so that's according to Kingsbury, which is one of your required readings for this course. In the Southeast Asian political context, however, we may argue that this is demonstrated by the framework of patron-client relations. Okay, so from the pre-colonial times to the colonial era to the post-colonial period, we can say that patron-client relations is something that's pervasive throughout Southeast Asia. Okay, so how do we illustrate or how do we understand patron-client relations? So from pre-colonial period to the post-colonial period, we see this kind of dynamic. So in the pre-colonial period, within the traditional patron-client model, rulers usually had some degree of reciprocal relations with their subjects. So it's about the relationship between rulers and their subjects, one which is reciprocal. We're going to post-colonial Southeast Asia, according to Kingsbury, in common with many societies far moved from Southeast Asia, patron-client relations continue to form much of the basis of society and politics, and often of economies and commerce. All right. So, um, if we are going to be analytical about this argument, we have to look into the interaction among usual political actors, and those are elite state actors like government leaders, the royal elite, because in some countries in Southeast Asia there are monarchies, there are constitutional monarchies, so they have a king, for example, in Thailand, as well as in Cambodia. Okay? So elite state actors are very much a significant part of what we're saying about patron-client relations. And then there's also the military. So the military has had an important role in contemporary Southeast Asian politics. If you look at the Philippines, for example, we've gone to regime transitions where the military was really actively involved. All right, and then there's also civil society, and this includes business sector, for example, different sectors of society with the masses, so the people basically, and the different groups that are involved in, advancing their political advocacy, political causes, political agenda, and interests. All right. If we're going to visualize this framework, maybe we can come up with something like this. All right. So, in political science, we love to illustrate, we love to um, help our viewers, our readers, our reviewers uh, to understand our framework by means of um, a graph or a chart like this or an image like this. Okay, so this is something that you do in your research paper, for example. And if we're going to explain this, maybe we can also learn from the insights of Kingsbury, where he says, in his book, he says, um, elites who intend to continue their political rule are able to satisfy or be seen to address most outstanding demands while at the same time avoiding the strongest dissatisfactions manifesting into collective action. Okay, so I think this is a very interesting and specific way to explain patron-client relations. And I think you have to take note of this because patron-client relations has been used a lot in a lot of research papers, a lot of studies on um, political science in Southeast Asia, for example, in the Philippines. But you still have to be very specific about what you mean by this. And I think this is a very um, useful way to explain how uh, we can make sense of contemporary Southeast Asia. All right. So again, to illustrate, we can describe the interrelations between the main actors involved in Southeast Asian politics. So let's talk about Cambodia. So here's a slide on this is a very basic timeline, of course, on of the history of Cambodia from colonialism to constitutional monarchy. Okay. Like most Southeast Asian countries, we have to note that Cambodia comes from a particular colonial experience, which we can say had enduring effects on contemporary Cambodian society and politics. One that includes border disputes due to the French creation of Indochina, okay? Uh, then the involvement of claims and interests of Vietnam and Siam or Thailand due to this creation of Indochina. So basically, we see how colonialism actually affected, society and politics, not just in Cambodia or in Cambodia and in relation to other um, states as well. Right? Uh, After independence, Cambodia began efforts towards state building, which we could specifically locate within competing ideologies during the Cold War. Then there was the ensuing dominance of the Khmer Rouge, a violent regime led by the Communist Party of Kampuchea, which we all know was led by its leader, Pol Pot. Okay? Cambodia eventually transitioned to a constitutional monarchy, which characterizes contemporary politics. And what kind of politics is that? And that's what we will discuss in the next slide. Basically, contemporary Cambodian politics is um, characterized by the leadership of Hun Sen. It's the country's prime minister since 1985. Okay? Cambodian politics is basically dominated by the Cambodian People's Party as the only choice for government. So Kingsbury argues or states since 1985, Hun Sen has been able to remain as Cambodia's prime minister with the interregnum as second prime minister. In achieving this, Hun Sen has used personal influence and patronage to maintain his support base intact and to manipulate and blindside his political opponents. Okay? So this is basic a quick and basic way to describe contemporary Cambod- Cambodian politics. Then we have Thailand, which is considered the only country that wasn't formally colonized by Europeans. However, this does not mean it never had relations with colonial powers at the time, given its role as a buffer state in the 1860s up to the 1890s. Okay. What do we mean by um, buffer state? So basically, it can be said Thailand was an absolute monarchy at the mercy of Europeans, specifically the British and the French. Okay. Um, it was also around this time when uh, the Bowring Treaty of 1855 made the Kingdom of Siam an open market economy. So in that sense, again, Thailand was uncolonized, but nevertheless important as a buffer state. All right. Also worth noting is the modernization it underwent under the rule of King Chulalongkorn. Okay, so in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Siam underwent centralization and internal modernization toward of colonial dominance. Right. So again, part of this was the reign of King Chulalongkorn. It was also um, a time when the army and the police were professionalized, and then there were also efforts to establish bureaucratization in government. And I think we also have to remember this was also a time when Buddhism was uh, very much established as dominant religion in Thailand or in Siam rather. Okay, so this event led to the 1932 coup, which saw the increasing role and significance of other political actors other than the monarchy, such as the military and the middle class. Middle class. Okay, so um, during this time, uh, the Kingdom of Siam or Siam was actually renamed to Thailand. Okay, and so it became a constitutional monarchy. Alright. Contemporary Thai politics may be characterized by a lot of tension and therefore instability in the sense that Thailand has had numerous regime transitions and coup attempts. So again, political instability and upheaval characterized by military coups, abrogation, and enactment of constitution since 1932. So I think scholars are also saying Thailand is the country that has had the most number of regime transitions, at least in the modern, um, in contemporary, in the sense of contemporary history. Okay, what is interesting is this is mostly a result of the relationship between the monarchy, the military, political elites, and civil society, as demonstrated by the conflicts involving the Shinawatras. So you have Taksin Shinawatra from 2001 to 2006, and then his sister Yingluck Shinawatra as prime minister from 2011 to 2014. Okay, so the relationship between or the conflict involving the Shinawatras, and then the military, and then the king. So in Thailand, the king is a very significant political actor because um, basically society and the political arrangement or political configurations in government also have to be or have to depend on whether or not um, um, the king approves of something or not. Okay? And then there are also the so-called red and yellow shirts, uh, which are basically members of civil society. The red shirts being the supporters of the Shinawatras, and then the yellow shirts as the supporters of more traditional elites, like again, king and the military. So there was little doubt that Thailand's coup was more that was about more than removing an allegedly corrupt government. Uh, Take note of this. It was very much about trying to break the Shinawatra family's hold on political power and, by extension, dismantling its extensive crony networks. But it was also about ensuring that the country's more traditional elites, including the royal family or most of it, the armed forces, and allied businesses, regained political power. Okay, so that's that's one way of again making sense of contemporary politics in Thailand. As for Indonesia, Indonesia is also interesting because we can say we can also say much of its contemporary political issues and arrangements were brought about by its struggle for independence and nationalism, considering its colonial history under the Dutch East Indies. Okay? To a significant extent, Indonesia's colonial experience brought to the fore the archipelago's complex identity as a nation-state, given the different ethnicities, linguistic, and religious groups involved. Okay, so as you all know, Indonesia is basically a very, not just a huge archipelago, but a very complex archipelago in that. This is at the core of Indonesia's national struggles and efforts against colonialism and after independence. Okay? So, in terms of, again, nationalism, we have to take note, for example, the emergence of Indonesia was actually a result of different ethnic groups, different identities coming together uh, and forming a sense of nation, and a nation which they called Indonesia. Okay, and the um, the irony there, I think, is that the name Indonesia is um, actually uh, an idea of a foreign um, power, or it's basically a result of also of colonialism. Okay? But again, the point here is that Indonesia is a result of the different political actors, the different um, identities uh, in the archipelago. Okay, and their goal was again uh, to confront Dutch colonial state, and that's also tied to their belief, their religious belief, specifically Islam. Okay? In terms of contemporary Indonesian politics, uh, Indonesian politics is captured by a series of regime transitions as well. So just like many countries, so like Thailand, parts of Philippines, Indonesia has had different regime transitions, okay? Especially from authoritarianism to democracy. However, this is definitely not without the political challenges attached to democratization, such as, again, the dominance of elite politics. And this is very much the case with the current administration of President Jokowi or Joko Widodo, whose party is controlled by uh, Megawati, the former a former president, and also the daughter of uh, former president Sukarno. Okay, so we see here how again political elites play a significant role in contemporary Indonesian politics. All right. Um, so I think another interesting thing here, since we're saying Indonesia has had regime transition, is if we're going to look at the history of Indonesia, they transitioned from authoritarianism under the Suharto regime to uh, a more democratic regime uh, under the different administrations after Suharto, or this period is basically called Reformasi. All right, so um, this is said to be a time of liberalization, democratization, but this is still very much a question, especially if we're going to look at the different challenges, different blockages, so to speak, such as the Army Territorial Command and the business interests, the different politicized ethnicities, again, the problem of corruption, and then bureaucracy, which is still very much in old hands. Again, if we're going to look at the situation of Jokowi and his political party, which is controlled by former President Megawati. Okay? So despite reconfirming its democratic processes, Indonesia remained marred by the presence of extra-legal organizations that continued to exist unchecked and indeed supported by some elite groups, while paramilitary security duty units uh, continue to feature as an adjunct to conventional political life. So that's one way of saying that there are still a lot of um, issues and problems in contemporary um, Indonesian politics, government and politics. And we see again the significance of the role played by political elite in relation to the military and again civil society. Um, what are what are some insights you can glean thus far from our discussion on Cambodia, Thailand, and Indonesia? Uh, of course, there's the pervasiveness of patron-client relations in Southeast Asian government and politics. As we discussed regarding Cambodia, Thailand, and Indonesia, we very much uh, observe patron-client relations in the way political elites relate uh, to the military, for example, for political dominance. And then there are also the civil society actors who also try to voice out their interests and their advocacy, their support for the government or their uh, opposition. Okay. Aside from this, we can also say that democracy is an ongoing, complex, and thoroughly challenging endeavor, largely captured by elite interests and in need of better and more viable political alternatives or reconfigurations to ultimately lead to social change. Okay, and I think this was the question, especially when the late King Rama the Ninth uh, passed away um, some years ago in Thailand. So, uh, what's next for the monarchy in Thailand? People were asking, okay? And what would be the effect of or what would be the impact of a new uh, king? Okay, and then in Indonesia, there's also the question on whether or not the administration of President Jokowi would be able to deliver, given the fact that his party is still controlled by elite interests or the usual people in Indonesian politics. All right. So if we will look at Cambodia, Thailand, and Indonesia, it is also a matter of looking for opening for democratization and for the deepening of democratization. Okay. So again, uh, the pervasiveness of patron-client relations, and then uh, the complexity of democratization. I think these are very important points that we have to consider when looking into contemporary Southeast Asian government and policy. Okay, so that's it. Um, if you have any questions, clarifications, uh, please contact me via email, uh, and we'll try to address your questions. We'll try to discuss your questions. Thank you.